The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. With your host, Dave Hondell.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Stage Door Show tonight. This is Dave Hondell. On tonight's show, we have an award-winning writer, producer, and director who has worked on some of TV's most iconic television shows. And we're happy to have him with us tonight. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Stan Zimmerman. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, you've written for some of TV's biggest shows, like I mentioned, you know, the Golden Girls, Roseanne fame, Gilmore Girls, Brothers, and so many others. You know, how did you get started in the industry? What got that interest going for you?
I started at a very young age, like 7, in my bedroom, creating ideas for TV shows, actually. I was so unpopular that nobody would play with me. No, we don't need to have like the string quartet, you know, sad story. But I created my own TV network in my bedroom. And I literally made a board and programmed 7 days a week of programming against all the major networks. I know,
Wow.
I should have been taken to a therapist, but instead I got taken to a theater camp and Cranbrook Theater School in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And there I started doing plays. And I thought the plays were kind of corny because they were princes and kings and things like that. Yeah. So I started ad-libbing or doing different shticky stuff, and I'd get laughs. And the minute I heard laughs, I got very excited, and I thought, this is what I need to do for my life. But I was not a reader, so I didn't think I could be a writer. And in English class, I didn't get the best grades. You know, I got like B's, but I didn't write very flowery. I just kind of got to the point. And what's interesting, years later, I learned that in writing for TV, especially sitcoms, you have to get right to the point because you got 22, 23 minutes. You got to get in and get out, you know, with jokes always leaving and entering rooms. But I just always had this very vivid imagination. And luckily I met my writing partner, Jim Berg, in NYU. I went there for acting, not knowing I would meet somebody that I would still be writing with today.
Now, growing up in Michigan as a child, I mean, did you ever dream that you were going to be where you are now?
Of course. Yeah. I used to tell my little sister, I was living in a mansion. I don't know if it's a mansion, but it has high ceilings. And but I said I would be in Hollywood. And I really always dreamed of what this world would like. For our 13th birthday, our bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs, my parents said you could go anywhere in the world we'll take you to. My brother picked Israel. Where did I pick?
Hollywood.
I had to go to Hollywood, yes. And it was just the most exciting thing, you know, I'd ever seen. And, you know, got to go to the Brown Derby. And as we're walking out, someone dropped their pepper mill, you know, that you have on your, yeah. So my mother picked it up and handed it to the woman, and I looked, and the woman was Ann Miller, the movie star.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my God, Ann Miller. Yeah, so it was very exciting. And I think we also chased another man down the street thinking it was Woody Allen, but it was just an old Jewish guy who was very nervous.
It wasn't Woody Allen, okay.
It wasn't Woody Allen, but he probably wondered why this, you know, little kid was like chasing after him with his autograph book.
Wow. Yeah, I can relate to that. I grew up loving movies and TV, and I had my first trip to Hollywood too, and it was a trip of a lifetime. So I can completely relate to you.
I mean, I could go to like, you know, movies every night. I remember my father was kind of strict, and he said you could only go to one movie a weekend. And I'm like, that is the dumbest rule in the world. Like, why couldn't I just, you know, live at a movie theater? I guess he wanted me out playing sports, but that was not going to happen.
What was your favorite movie growing up?
I have to say it's The Wizard of Oz. And I didn't see it in a movie theater. I saw it as, you know, in my house, and it was only once a year because we didn't have VCRs back then.
Right.
And when my parents got a dog, they actually got a Cairn Terrier. And of course, we were so unimaginative, we named her Toto.
Sure, of course.
And they told us that she was related to the Toto dog in the movie. And of course, as a kid, you believe that. And then you go to school and you tell everybody that. How that dog somehow ended up in Detroit, Michigan, I don't know. But she did. And we treated her like royalty.
That's incredible. You know, talking about movies, Wizard of Oz, and to today, obviously the business has really evolved, from the TV shows way back when to now. So talk about that evolution, and how does that change your writing? And, do you always try to stay ahead of the curve, knowing what's going on in pop culture, or you just try to really, have you ever sit in the writing room and think that you're actually creating pop culture, with the episode that you're working on?
You have about 50 questions in that one question. So I could pick any road and go down there for like 3 hours, and none of us will be eating for a while, but it'll be longer than waiting for the election result. But I've always been a fan and a freak about pop culture. I would just obsess about news from Hollywood, and I would cut out from the newspaper all the movies that were playing in town, and I had a cork wall, and I'd put them up. And so I always wanted to know what actor was doing what. And I remember my father went to New York, and he brought me back a Variety newspaper, and I memorized everything in there. I knew every play, what theater was at, how much money that play made.
Sure.
So I always loved pop culture, and I feel like what my writing is about, it's very commercial and pop culture oriented, but it always pushes the boundaries in some way. I don't purposely go to push the boundaries. It's just what I gravitate towards. I'm very sensitive and sympathetic about how people feel. So I think I just go towards, I have just my heart just is drawn to stories like that, and I want to tell them. And but when you're writing them, you don't think, oh, I'm going to write about pop culture. When we're lucky enough to get on Golden Girls, I never thought, years later, I would be on a Golden Girls fan cruise with, over 1,000 fans, which I was at the beginning of this year, pre-COVID.
Wow.
I was on 2 back-to-back and met just the most wonderful people, men, women of all ages, and they've become friends. And it's been really a wonderful part of writing on shows like that. And it's just funny because people will come up and say, I don't mean to bother you, can I tell you this? And I'm like, are you kidding? Because writers don't get that. Actors get people coming up to them and talking about projects that they're in because they know their faces. And a little more now, because of shows like yours or just being with social media. But I love to hear, what people think of, certain lines, or and I'll go into these, like Golden Girl fan groups on Facebook, and they'll post little memes of lines that I wrote, like, no, I will not have a nice day. And I'll say, oh, thanks, that's my line. And they'll be like, what do you mean that's your line? Or
that's incredible.
People post a lot, in the past 4 years, Sure Jan from the Brady Bunch movies.
Yeah.
And that was something that we, wrote, and not knowing that it would end up being a meme, for so many people.
That's amazing. And then also, Roseanne, you were part of that crew as well. And when you're on a production like that ends up being such a legendary show, and you were part of, you were nominated actually for one of the episodes, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and back then, and like we talked about before, cutting edge. Did you ever, when you're sitting in that room, do you ever think that what the episode that you're actually writing is going to have that big of an impact?
Well, I mean, I knew that she was a touchstone, and she really, at that time with Tom Arnold, they were in the news a lot. I mean, they just, walked down the street and suddenly they were on the news. I didn't have any idea that this subject of Roseanne kissing a woman would turn into a news event. We literally would be writing it during the day. I'd come home, if I was lucky to come home at 11 o'clock, watch the news, and they would be talking about our episode on the news. Because at the time, ABC said, you cannot film this episode. We're not airing it, you can't film it. And to the credit of Roseanne and Tom Arnold, they said, if you don't air it, we will buy it back, buy time on HBO, and air it there. So they were like, okay. And then they tried to get us to cut down the kiss to 2.3 seconds. And then Jim and I threw a big benefit for GLAAD, which is a gay and lesbian media organization, not knowing if the scene was going to be in there. We didn't know, because back then you just didn't know. And we had just CNN and everybody who came, and they're filming it. We had hundreds of people there. We were raising money for this group. and they kissed, and I just remember, 200-300 people in this huge disco just screaming because we'd never seen anything like that on TV before. Now it seems so like, really? It was all, pre-Ellen and Will and Grace. And, the cool thing is that being, I couldn't have done that if it wasn't for Soap and other shows before what we did.
Yeah.
And then see people stand on our shoulders to be able to, do even bigger shows in that arena.
That's amazing. Talking about writing, a lot of our listeners are independent artists. Some of them are writers as well. But talk about that process, because I don't think a lot of people realize that when you're a writer for a show, you often work with a team of writers, and it's not just one or two people. Am I right in that?
Yes. Usually it's, can be, 5-10 people. On Roseanne, it was 21 writers.
Wow.
So they brought in a lot of their stand-up comedy friends who had never written before, like Norm Macdonald and Laura Keitlinger and Sid Youngers and Pat Bullard. And they've all gone on to become writers. But at the time, they were just joke people. And so we would, we had to separate because there were so many people, you'd have different rooms. And Jim and I would run a room with some of those people like Norm Macdonald and talking to them. And Lois Bromfield was in the room. About the jokes have to come from character. They can't just be a joke. Right. And especially with a show like Roseanne, it really wasn't like, funny, ha ha. It was because they came from character. And I always thought, and I learned that, we learned it on Golden Girls, really character humor. And that's what makes things funny, if they're real to that specific character. So, that was a big group of people to kind of navigate. Now, shows have much smaller staffs because just the economics of it. But it's great to be in a room with like really funny, creative people. And if you get to run a show like we did with Rita Rocks on Lifetime, you get to pick, the writers in the room and who you're hanging out with and laughing with, and people you can count on to who are the real funny joke people, who are good story people, who's going to give me that perspective that I wouldn't necessarily have. And that's, it's like creating a dinner party.
Now, when you have so many creative people in the same room, do you ever butt heads? And how do you?
Oh, no, never. Of course you do.
How do you navigate around that?
Well, it's easier when you're a Libran like myself, who is very much into compromising and
Sure.
balancing everybody.
Sure.
But because I've written with somebody, a writing partner, since the beginning, I always had in my mind that it's about compromising and finding that balance. And so that muscle was already in me. I think at the beginning of my career, I would be, like the one that would raise my hand and go, why are those characters talking and why are they friends? And they'd be like, shut up. It's just they're friends because they're in the script. Like, don't think so much about it. So, obviously I had a learning curve, and, you have to learn, the biggest thing I learned was pick your battles. Sure. I think that's really in any business is you don't want to be that person to be like, no. Like, especially when you're writing on someone else's show, they are hiring you for your opinion, but you have to know when to back off and go, here's what I think, but if this is what you want to do, okay, how do I make what they want work? And then when I get in that position, and it's my show, how do I explain to people what I would want?
Right. And also you also do a lot of directing and producing in the theater as well. It's not just the TV and film, but as you can see your shirt, Pop-Up Playhouse, your theater company, and you've done a lot of productions and been, a lot of awards have come from that. But talk about the difference between maybe writing, producing, and directing in the theater versus a TV show and film. I mean, obviously they're different mediums, but do you prefer one over the other? Working in
I got back into theater after doing Gilmore Girls, and I did a reality show on Bravo called Situation Comedy that Sean Hayes of Will and Grace produced. And they asked me to direct this play, and I just loved it. I was like, I was in heaven. And so I started directing more plays, and then Larry Hirschhorn, a big Broadway producer, I was having drinks with him in New York, and he said, you're a writer, write a play. And I'm like, who wants to? I'm not going to write about myself, but I wrote about the world that I live in.
Sure.
And so one of the first plays I created was about actresses in an audition room at a network for a really bad sitcom.
Oh.
And called Meet and Greet. And
Okay.
I did that. And then created another musical. And both those I did with another writing partner, Christian McLaughlin, who worked on Married with Children. So I've always liked working with other people. I like being able to go back and forth and spitball with them. But we created a musical using TV theme songs, over 40 theme songs from I Love Lucy to Big Bang, Cheers and Friends and Golden Girls, obviously. And so we're still working on that one.
It sounds great. Talking about theater, and I was telling you before we started recording that we have friends on Broadway, and unfortunately, a lot of young actors, struggling actors on Broadway and off Broadway are unfortunately out of work right now. It's dark until I believe next summer. So
theaters across
the
world,
everywhere.
But and I've been doing mostly small theater in LA. We can't do theater now.
Right.
And I was really going more towards that in my career. I love television. I love movies. There's something about being in a theater with live people, especially a comedy.
Sure.
And I go to my plays when I direct them every night. And the actor's like, really, you're coming back? I'm like, why would I not want to be there hearing people, scream laughing after, during your lines? So I really was liking that and the intimacy of the theater, and also mixing art and advocacy with some of my theater projects of late.
Right.
And so that was kind of my goal, and maybe thinking of moving back to New York or having a certain project kind of getting me back to New York for 3-4 months and testing the waters and being back there. And I was actually back in New York in March, workshopping a new play. And then COVID hit, and we got one reading out, and then I got back on a plane and came back here, and I've literally been sitting here since March, yes, in the spot.
Well, the difference between LA and New York, because that's something I wanted to explore also, because when you have theater in LA, are the works in LA different than New York? I mean, do you have to kind of keep that in mind where you're going to workshop it and play it depending on?
Yeah, LA has this, it's LA theater. And also, when I started in theater here, over 10 years ago, it seemed very separate. There were the TV people, and then there were TV movie people and theater people. And I was like, why can't we all be together like is in New York and London? So I kind of made it my goal to knock down those barriers. And I really have seen that evolution change. It used to be in the beginning like, you're a TV person. And then now it's just like, we're all together doing it. And I wanted to create in LA spaces where anybody would feel welcome. You don't have to, if you're on a TV show, you don't have to work in this huge big theater. You could come do a play with me in a 50-seat theater. So I've been working with some amazing, wonderful people like Marissa Jared Winokur from Hairspray, a Tony Award winner.
Yeah,
she did her first play, not a musical, with me in a 50-seat theater, and we just had the best time.
Wow, that's great. What is in your career, what is the most memorable moment? Or you might have several, but what is your most
here with you?
Oh, really? Well, that's great. Thank you, Stan. That's great, because I need the followers. I'm starting to really gain it, but this will really help, and I really appreciate you being on.
I'm sure with me you're gonna just burst out. Yeah, the old Jew influencer. I've had so many wonderful moments, and that's why I kind of jump out of bed, because I don't purposely move or shift. It's like where things kind of have evolved and where stories I want to tell.
Right.
So I keep pushing myself, and Jim and I did that with our writing career too. Every time it kind of seemed there was a lull and sitcoms are dead, we got into writing movies and did the Brady Bunch movies, and then we got back into sitcoms, and then we rewrote the Annie musical for Zayden and Marin on ABC, and it was Kathy Bates and Kristen Chenoweth and Alan Cumming, and it was crazy cast.
It was great.
So then we started getting into writing musicals, and that was really wonderful, and now getting into plays, and so just juggling all those things with stories and telling. Really, I love obviously telling comedy stories, but then also creating this piece right before I go using real suicide notes, which I created after a very close friend of mine died by suicide 8 years ago. So I created a piece in kind of the model of vagina monologues where people can read the notes with like a day rehearsal sitting at stools.
Sure.
But we just did a virtual recording of it last month where I'm now in the play. So it's a full circle moment.
Nice.
So originally I created it was just people reading all the notes. And then my director, Michael Wilson, suggested I put my story in it. So now the play is really about what happens to a funny comedy writer person when something tragic happens in their life.
Sure.
So I'm there acting virtually with Vanessa Williams and Blair Underwood. And, you know, that was a pretty amazing experience to have and to figure out ways to still be creative during COVID.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Other thing I was going to ask you about COVID, because everybody has.
I knew you were going to ask that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the fact that you did like, you know, a Zoom, I guess, performance, we've seen that a lot, I guess, during COVID. But, you know, I think
I've done like one a month. I've done a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
Some mostly live, but I've been starting to record.
Sure.
A few of them. Yes.
Well, it allows you to be creative still. And how do you draw your creativity? I mean, what do you draw your inspiration from when you start writing? I mean, is it everyday events that happen that you notice and like, oh,
coffee,
that's a great idea.
Coffee and sugar-free Red Bull. So I would be a really good spokesperson for that. You know, it's just being alive and having your antennas. And when I started back at this Cranbrook Theater School when I was a kid, luckily they told me at 7.5 years old, as an actor, watch people. And I just got that in my head. I watch and I look and I like think of what are they saying over there? I make up dialogue, and sometimes my writing partners still do that. So it's just being inquisitive and listening and caring about other people and what's happening in the world.
Sure. Well, what advice would you give my listeners as independent artists as they embark on their career? What's the one piece of advice that you would give them, and no matter what genre they're in, one piece.
Just keep going, keep creating. I'm like, you know, those mazes. If you hit one thing, then figure out a way. Know where you want to go, but then you're going to be hitting blocks and people telling you no, or you are telling yourself no for whatever reason. Just keep figuring a way to get to that. And that's the wonderful thing about being an artist, is that you can create. No one can tell you not to create. You know, if you're a painter, you can take out whatever you're going to paint with, or if you're a musician, you sit there and what song am I going to write or sing? If you're a writer, you can turn on your computer and suddenly you have a creation. And then you find or if it's a play, you find actors that want to read your words.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be nothing better in the world to have something you've written down and having somebody perform it on the screen. That's got to be just a great ride.
Well, the first biggest thrill when I first it hit me was on Golden Girls, when I would be standing on the stage and I would look to the right and there'd be like those, stands of the studio audience of all ages screaming and laughing at your lines. And I would look over there and there would be like 4 of the most talented women ever on television saying the lines. And that was so super cool that
that's amazing.
That just, makes me want to keep going. Or up to the thing I just did with Vanessa Williams, and there she is saying my lines. And I just am so blessed that I've gotten to work with so many wonderful people.
How was it working with the Golden Girls? The cast, like you said, they're amazing. Do you have like a funny story you can share?
Oh, I have plenty. I'm saving some. I actually just signed a book deal.
Oh, okay.
With Indigo River, and it's called The Girls from Golden to Gilmore. And it's stories about all the wonderful women I've worked with and Roseanne. And it will be a tell-all, but a real Valentine to the women that have been such an influence in my life and have shaped me as a writer, but more specifically as a person.
Yeah, we can't wait till that comes out. So what other?
I can't wait till I write it. I'm talking to you. I should be sitting,
writing.
Yes.
So what other projects do you have that we can look forward to?
I'm about to do a virtual recording of a play I wrote called Yes, Virginia. with Mindy Sterling from Austin Powers and Arnisha Walker.
Love Mindy Sterling. Oh,
Oh,
wow.
she is brilliant.
Yes.
I've done a bunch of plays with her, and if I don't cast her in a play, she gives me crap about it in front of everybody.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-character play. We were supposed to do it in North Carolina in December, but because of COVID, we're going to be recording it, and I will be getting out the information. So if people follow me on social media, they can see Mindy and Arnisha in this really wonderful, heartwarming, but really funny play based on my mother and my longtime African-American housekeeper in Detroit.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
It takes place on Christmas Eve.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's a nice holiday piece, but it has the humor, but also the reality of like a Golden Girls episode.
Sure. That's great. I can't wait for that. Stan, I just want to tell everybody about your website as well. It's zimmermanstan.com. And I loved going through your website. I think it's very well done. Just looking at your history, your bio, just growing up in Michigan. I'm a Midwesterner as well. I grew up in Minnesota, so I can kind of relate to the cold weather. Yeah. That's why I think one of the things I liked about the Golden Girls was St. Olaf, and just hearing that as a kid, you kind of get proud of that. Us Midwesterners, we get excited about stuff like that. But
all of that, when we were in the first season, we kind of came up with all those stories. Like,
oh wow,
in the first season we, in the pilot, she didn't always tell those long stories, and just that kind of evolved into a bit of hers. Yeah. So that was
something we got very excited about every time we heard Minnesota. So that was great. But again, check out zimmermanstan.com for just like I said, a wonderful website, Stan. And I can't thank you enough for joining me tonight. It's a big honor for me to have you on. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for asking me, and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Absolutely. And stay safe during COVID, and we can't wait to see what you have coming up.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Stan.